Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and this is my review of episode 11 of season 3 of Star Trek Discovery. And I think it's probably one of the better episodes of this season. It feels like it's about something. We finally have kind of a unique story, kind of like the old Star Trek shows in which they go down to some place and there's some kind of mystery to be solved. And there's a lot of strange things happening, and it kind of makes sense in the end, even though there are still plenty of kind of stupid stuff in there, a lot of outrageous kind of moments. But overall, I think I kind of like this episode, surprisingly. Most of this show is not so good, in my opinion, but there are sometimes episodes or specific scenes which are actually kind of good, and I actually really like the overall idea of this episode. Except maybe the revelation of how the burn happened, I think is kind of ridiculous. I made a lot of theory videos trying to come up with possible explanations, possible ways it would be plausible, but what they did is kind of something I would never imagine because it's kind of too stupid. So I didn't like that revelation, even though I guess I can accept it because we did see all kinds of crazy stuff in Star Trek, but not to this extent, not to something that affected the whole galaxy to such an extent by something so simple and small. And so that's a minor problem I had with this episode, but most of the episode I actually found enjoyable. And finally, the big villain of this season, Osira, actually feels dangerous and threatening, because previously she was really a pathetic villain who's not really doing anything. She's just everybody keep mentioning her. And also Tilly kind of has a trial by fire in this episode, and I still think it was silly the way they made her first officer despite being an ensign who only just became an ensign. She was a cadet in the previous seasons, and immediately she's the first officer, and now she's put in charge of the whole ship, and immediately has to face off against such, the worst possible enemies and all of that right away. But I kind of like that, so that almost makes it worthwhile, the fact that the whole setup to this was kind of silly, but at least they're doing something with it. So it wasn't just there just to be there, so at least they're playing around with it. And actually some of the lines by the villain make sense, and I kind of like them because she's calling it all out, because she's saying, oh, you're a cadet Tilly and you're the captain, and she's kind of poking fun at her. The villain's actually saying the things that make more sense. The villain actually felt smarter than the crew of the Discovery in this episode, and I'll get to that in my detailed review. And they did something very interesting with SARU in this episode with his face, and so I like that. Also, there was kind of a holodeck element in this episode, which we didn't see in this whole show up until now. We never saw a holodeck episode, even though somehow they did have some kind of a holodeck even in season 1. But since then they were not really using it even in this season, and now they're kind of put into an alien holodeck, and so we have kind of like an alien environment which is kind of fantastical, and it's okay because it's all in a kind of simulation, a holodeck. And so I kind of liked all of that, and it actually felt like a Star Trek episode because we have characters who go into kind of a weird situation and have to figure out what's going on. So that kind of reminds me of the kind of episodes I always liked in the old Star Trek shows, and we didn't yet see this kind of episode in this show. And that holodeck simulation is kind of like of a fantastical place with a lot of weird stuff happening, and I wish it would have been even weirder, because if it's a simulation, then virtually anything that you can imagine can happen there. And so maybe they should have played more with that. Like they have that kind of maze with all the staircases, and so I was hoping for a scene kind of like that painting of those staircases that leading back to themselves in an illogical way. But if it's all inside the holodeck simulation, that would be okay. Even Inception did a scene like that. So I was hoping and waiting for something like that, but they didn't do it. But maybe they will the next episode, because this is a continuing story. It wasn't wrapped up in the end. And we had all kinds of weird creatures flying in the sky and all kinds of monsters. And so I kind of liked it. And all of this environment, the fact that it was set up for someone to live in, that kind of reminded me of one of my favorite TNG episodes called Future Imperfect, in which we had something similar. And so this episode actually had a lot of elements which I actually like. And they even explain all kinds of things that didn't make sense in the previous episodes, all kind of small lines that didn't really connect because they didn't set it up, they didn't explain them. And this episode kind of explains a few things in a way that justifies what was done previously. And they revealed the big mystery box of what caused the burn, and that explanation was kind of silly, and they made a few theory videos about that whole topic. And I said if it's a galactic wide event, then the explanation must be something amazingly complex, or something giant, something huge, maybe some Q level entities that caused it for some reason. And so the reveal was kind of disappointing and kind of silly and even stupid because I guess it's spoilers, so stop the video here if you don't want to hear it from me. But the burn was caused accidentally by a Kelpian man-child who got triggered and he yelled out in terror, and that created some kind of wave that destroyed all the dilithium in the galaxy, and it almost happens again in this episode. Because that kid is living in that simulation that his mom created for him, just like in that episode of TNG I mentioned, and the program was deteriorating because of radiation and stuff, and so that's why everything became creepy. I guess in the beginning it was kind of an awesome fantasy land, but now it's all creepy and there's monsters and stuff. And because that Kelpian, I guess, got mutated by the radiation, and that gave him superpowers, and so if he yells out in terror, that wave goes out into the galaxy and might destroy all of the dilithium. So I think that's kind of silly. He is close to a planet which they said is made purely out of dilithium and stuff, so maybe all of that dilithium together somehow gave him these superpowers. So that kind of means he's kind of Q level entity. So why do the other entities do not stop him or do something? Like we know from the other Star Trek shows, there are plenty of omnipotent or nearly omnipotent energy creatures in the galaxy, so how come none of them are doing anything about it? And so it doesn't really make sense, and it's kind of silly, and the fact that it was caused accidentally is also, I think, is a missed opportunity, because as I mentioned in many videos, I expected something more complex, that maybe someone did it deliberately, maybe for a good reason, maybe to prevent all the wars in the galaxy between the different planets, or maybe some kind of justified reason. But no, it was just an accident. So just some Kelpian shouted out in terror, and that blew up all the dilithium. And I think that's kind of silly. And also, if he was in the epicenter of it, if he was close to this planet, then how did they even survive that? And so it doesn't really make sense. I'm kind of willing to accept that dilithium is kind of like a magical, exotic matter now and all of that. I made videos about that. I'm okay with retconning that a little bit. But the fact that it can now give you such superpowers that you can affect the whole galaxy now, so I think that was kind of too silly, even though we did see all kinds of super powerful entities in all the old Star Trek shows, and sometimes it can be caused by a random mutation, like Gary in the original Star Trek show, and like that kid with the superpowers. And so I guess we can accept that some beings can accidentally become super powerful and can cause galactic-wide destruction. That's fine, but I wish they would do some kind of morality tale with that. Maybe they will in the next episode, because the story isn't over yet. We don't yet know what will happen next, but shouldn't they be asking the question that maybe they should kill that guy because he's now so dangerous that if he does it again, maybe millions of people will die? Maybe that justifies kind of taking him out right now, as not to risk it, because if he might kill millions of people again, he did it already, so he's a mass murderer, even if it wasn't intentional, but he's such a danger to so many other people in the galaxy, then I think it kind of justifies maybe killing him. So maybe they should raise that topic for discussion in the next episode. That would actually be an interesting moral dilemma to deal with. If this guy is so dangerous that if he sneezes and the whole galaxy explodes, then maybe you should just kill him right away and not risk it. And so it might be justifiable, and of course maybe they will try to save him, maybe in the end they will do it. And so I am kind of intrigued for the first time in this season to see what will happen next. So other things I did not like in this episode, all that stuff with Adira not seeing her ghost boyfriend, and suddenly she does see him or her or they or them, or I don't know how they're to call that person. Anyway, he reappears again to her, and so why should we care about that? Like, they've been dragging it out for like 5 episodes. One of the things I hate most in shows is the ghost characters. A character who no one can see except one character. I really think it's lame and it's not interesting, and so all of that part is terrible, and also the parts with Stamens and his boyfriend and all of that, it just felt like a really bad soap opera. And Santilli being in charge, I guess, is kind of silly, but at least they did something with it in this episode, so finally it felt like it's worth it to do something with it. And there were some funny scenes when the Admiral kind of almost made fun of that as well, but then didn't, and so he kind of, subtle acting, the way he kind of looked at her like really an ensign being the captain, but he didn't say anything, so I like that moment. Visually, I thought this episode was good, and they show us this planet which exploded with the dilithium, and it had the same kind of effect as we saw in the second episode of the season, when all the chunks of the planet were still floating in the air somehow. And so I guess it's because dilithium is so exotic matter. It's kind of like unobtainium from Avatar, and it causes magnetic fields and all of that. I'm actually okay with all of that. And even back in Star Trek 6, when we saw the Klingon moon Praxis exploding, we saw an image of that, and it also looked like chunks of the planet were somehow being held together by some kind of magnetic field or something. And so I don't really mind that. The way they didn't use their spore drive annoyed me a little bit, because why can't they simply use it multiple times as they did in Season 1, for example, when they were jumping all around the Klingon ship? So why are they not doing something like that here? The moment that Osara's ship showed up in front of them, they could have simply jumped not completely away, but they could have simply jumped to a big distance so that she cannot attack them, and yet they didn't even do that. And she even points that out. She asks Tilly, why are you not jumping away unless you're protecting someone on that planet? But they could have protected them, just put some distance from the other ship, and yet no one is thinking about that, so why not? Also, the way they were surprised to find that this is the location of the burn, but they knew it already from a few episodes ago, and yet when they discovered it, they're all amazed and shocked by that this is the planet that caused the burn, but they knew it, that it's from here, and so why are they shocked? And only now, after 5 episodes, that they know about this distress signal, only now they decide to go there, so that was a little bit silly. But that's kind of the fault of the previous episodes, I guess, more than this one. And that whole Fantasyland element in that holographic simulation was interesting. The fact that they all looked like aliens was also interesting. The doctor looked like a Bajoran and Michael looked like a Trill, but I kind of wonder, why did they make her the Trill? Because you can barely see the spots on her, and that's an issue I had both with this show previously and the short treks, and even in Star Trek Picard. They always put the spots on black people for some reason, and then you can barely see them, you can barely tell they are Trill. So I don't get why they always decide to do that. So that's kind of not a good choice visually. It's not about race or anything, it's just visually it's not a good choice to pick that actor to put that kind of makeup on, simply because it would be less visible. So maybe they should have made the Doctor a Trill and make her a Bajoran. What I did like is that they showed us SARU as a human. That was interesting. The only minor nitpick I have about that is that he said that he walks normally on his heels like a normal person, and so I kept wondering, how does the holodeck change his body physically? Like, I can get that their appearance might change because of the holographic simulation on top of them, but how does it actually change his body so that he can walk like a normal human and feeling it if it's all in a simulation? So that part didn't really make sense. Maybe it's such a super advanced holodeck, it can actually change their bodies themselves. So fine, I guess. And all the glitchy holograms, maybe they should have all blinked at them really fast and they would all disappear, just like Emperor Giorgio did previously, all those monster holograms and all of that. They can just blink at them really fast and then they would destabilize. So why don't they do that? I guess you never told anyone you can do that. So that's all I had to say about it for now. I will do another video going into more details about all the things I liked or didn't like, or the things that didn't make sense or did make sense. So I will do another more extensive video about all the things we saw in this episode. So that's it for now. Let me know what you think and we can discuss it in the comment section below. And I will see you all next time. Bye bye.